Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. I'm Bird's Eye View Politics and I take a bird's eye view look at politics and geopolitical affairs. And in this video, I'm going to be going over what could be one of the greatest deception campaigns in modern times in war, which is the Ukrainian offensive in the east of the country, southeast of Kharkiv, and north of Donetsk. So let's go back a bit to the last time I made a video on Ukraine. The last time we were zoomed in on the southwestern area of Ukraine, with Kherson being the major city we are looking at. The Ukrainians had basically for months moved troops and ammunition and prepared for an attack to retake Kherson, and they had also made proclamations to that effect, stating that they are about to liberate Kherson, and not just the west bank of the Dnieper River that lies in the oblast, essentially to the west of where my cursor is, but also the entirety of the Kherson Oblast, even on the east bank of the Dnieper. So the Russians saw this and they moved troops from Donetsk and Luhansk regions or oblasts over to the southwest, where they were going to defend against the attack on Kherson. Now, the Ukrainians started with an artillery bombardment and took out a bunch of bridges connecting Kherson with the East Bank, essentially isolating troops on the West Bank. That was a major breakthrough for Ukraine because it meant Russia couldn't resupply their troops unless it took Zaporizhia further to the northeast, on the east bank of the Dnieper, where there's, of course, some other bridges. Russia does know that, so Russia had to rely on pontoon bridges, which is never a good idea. So the Ukrainians supposedly started their counteroffensive, and as you can see from this map, they made a few gains in areas of Lozov and took some towns around Lyubimka and Alexandrivka, but they never actually got to Kherson. And so Russia started saying, well, we've won. Well, it turned out Ukraine actually had two attacks at once. They had what could potentially be a diversionary attack towards Kherson, and they also have their attack around Kharkiv and Sloviansk. Now, if we go back very, very, very far towards the very beginning of the conflict, already by the 10th of March, we had essentially the Russians were outside Kharkiv. They were actually fighting their way towards the city center. Even by the 25th of February, they had already essentially reached the city center of Kharkiv, eventually losing. Now, the Ukrainians had essentially done limited counteroffensives here and there, never really taking large cities, while towards the southeast, the Russians took the key city of Mariupol and made some gains around Izium. Now, Izium is a major town in that region because it is roughly halfway between the second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv, and the large cities of the southeast, like Donetsk. So Izium was going to be, according to what many people thought, was that Izium would be essentially where Russia began their attack from the east bank of this river over and into northern Donetsk Oblast, and they would eventually link up with Russians coming from the south in the area towards Melitopol and Mariupol, troops who had just finished taking those cities. Now, the Russians made some limited defenses here and there. Ukraine made some limited counteroffensives. In the south, the front stabilized. And in the north, Russia's offensive never really made much progress. However, essentially out of nowhere, we have now received news as of roughly 2 hours ago that Ukraine has not only had a counteroffensive from the west bank of this river, but they have taken Izium and made it all the way to the next river, the river that flows in Kupiansk and Kyivshenka. Now, if Ukraine truly has made these counteroffensives and geosatellite stuff says that they have, then this is a major victory for Ukraine. It takes back lots of territory in the east of the country, deals morale blows to the Russians, and further eliminates any prospect of Russia holding a referendum in Kharkiv Oblast. Because now Russia controls not only zero of Kharkiv itself, but has also lost major cities just in the past few days. Now, If Ukraine continues to go and potentially removes Russia from the Kharkiv Oblast, it would essentially finalize the demise of Russia in the Kharkiv region, which has been happening since essentially the first few weeks after the invasion when it stalled. But there has been some slow Russian progress, of course. In my latest videos, I talked about how Russians had taken Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and how they had been making some noise in cities such as Donetsk about pushing out, taking the rest of Donetsk Oblast. However, because Ukraine's made this attack around Izium, I think that Russia can't take Donetsk, and more importantly, will have to divert troops from Melitopol away because they won't be able to essentially take troops from Kherson, where the main Ukrainian force, supposedly at least, is. We also had news that Russia tried to buy, or is buying rather, uh, munitions from Iran and North Korea, which is hardly the way that you show confidence in your military. If they're running out of ammunition already, while Ukraine is still getting ammunition from their Western allies, clearly Russia is not only outgunned by the West, but is now being outgunned on the battlefield by Ukraine itself. I do think that this bodes well for Ukraine and could eventually see the end of this war. Of course, if Ukraine is able to liberate, maybe not Crimea, of course, but the rest of their territory, I think we could potentially see an end to this war by essentially midway through 2023. However, if Ukraine gets stuck or Russia counterattacks, I don't see an end to this war, and it could turn into the long war that Vietnam was for the United States and Afghanistan was for the old USSR. So, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.